Hello, this is Group 4's case assignment presentation on Apple by Kyle, Sarah, Nassim, Ryan, and Taylor. The problem we've agreed upon is the simple fact that Apple continues to grow and create further advancements in the tech industry, specifically the phone industry. They are finding themselves more and more reliant on the idea of subcontracting out parts of products to ensure continued production meets the needs of the demand. This is due to them not actually owning any production factories. While this can be a great way to cut costs and ensure even larger profits, this does cause two main issues for the company. First, the reliance on subcontractors to get the job done, and second, the extended chain that comes with subcontracting. To break it down, we're going to start with the first problem. The issue with not owning your own factories and subcontracting to other companies to manufacture your product is that you are reliant on another company. This is especially problematic when companies are in parts of the world where both economic and political structures are, at the best of times, only semi-stable and a quick gust away from collapse. This comes with the threat of new legal requirements, higher pay, or on the reverse end, reduced quality products, or even slave labor. The worst case scenario could be subcontracting is a way for companies to work with other companies when collaborating to complete large projects. Apple has many suppliers it works with in order to meet demand, especially in the technology industry. With large projects, the company needs to work with suppliers to make sure orders are placed and completed. At the same time, there is risk that performance will not be met as required. Apple, in this case, relies on subcontracting suppliers that will complete products based on the demand. Apple has to deal with making sure products are completed with good quality. Apple's product development process is designing products which are completed by teams that ultimately don't report to finance or manufacturing. They meet regularly to see what works and what doesn't. The products then get tested, which are taken to Apple's headquarters. This is where they will decide which products they will invest in, since Apple's reputation is providing good quality. At this point, the supply chain needs to operate with the best integrity. This means hiring workers that will work to complete the product chosen to sale. Apple and suppliers need to make sure manufacturing is completed in a given time frame, which according to the Richard Ivory School of Business Foundation, Apple's product lifecycle is to normally complete products in 1 year. This is why Apple deals with conducting marketing research to test products so they are able to make upgrades when needed. They have invested $4.5 billion on research and development alone. Apple's reputation can be put at risk when it comes to the relationships that are built through suppliers and customers. In order for suppliers to meet the demand of Apple, products are time sensitive, which can cause subcontracts to not follow through the code of conduct, especially when outside the country. The laws can be different, and there have been suppliers that have violated labor rules. In 2017, Apple found 44 core violations. It doesn't make sense when workers are being recruited and having to pay to work for the suppliers. Labor can put Apple out of compliance when it comes to fair treatment for employees, since suppliers are going against the code of conduct Apple has created. It is good that Apple has policies and procedures suppliers should follow. There are training and communication, which involves suppliers providing training on employees' rights and understanding the code of conduct. Suppliers need to follow Apple's agreement, especially those that Apple owns. When this doesn't happen, labor, for example, can be treated differently, since employees can be taken advantage of. In an example of this, China recruits for workers that are willing to work under hard conditions. Suppliers outside of the country can go to extremes in accomplishing the goals of supplying and producing the number of products expected, which means going against the laws. This can make labor more costly. Apple can affect the relationship built between customers as well as suppliers, which leaves workers in the middle where some might not even end up knowing his or her rights. This can also cause workers to be less productive and produce less quality parts. The quality of work in the newer iPhones and the quality of production seem to have gone down over the years. This is due to the simple idea that with an extended supply chain and such vast lines of communication, the quality of the production line goes down. When governments, such as Taiwan, start to interfere with the companies contracted by Apple, the production line slows. This also leads to Apple having to rely more on the other contractors, which causes rushing in the chain, which leads to the product being produced becoming lower quality. We see this a lot with different versions of the phones being released, and an obvious difference in ability even within the same generation of the phone. An example, the iPhone X and XS are vastly different, and this could be both due to original design, which is part of the selling point, but also where the pieces of the final product come from. Think of it like this. With the below picture, why not have your higher quality product, the XS, come from either your European or Chinese partners, and then the lower quality product, the 10, come from the other supply lines. This changes the product's quality and causes a vast difference when it comes to the final product, which leads people to spend more money on the X than the original for that simple. Unfortunately, it seems Apple only lists their top 200 suppliers on their own website. This leads to a question that doesn't seem to be able to be answered. How many suppliers and how many suppliers of those suppliers work with Apple themselves? We know that the chain breaks down into the simplest forms as listed in the previous chapter of this presentation. Sourcing comes from 2 main countries and a random list of Asian countries and European countries. This leads to more issues due to the simple fact that we do not know how wide or tall the actual supply chain goes. But with Apple's high prices, we can surmise that it has to be rather wide overall, which, as stated in the definition of the problem, leads to a weaker chain and higher chance of one chain breaking, causing the entirety of production to collapse, similar to what happened with the iPhone X. Another factor that goes into this is that Apple most likely has multiple chains in the case of breakdowns. Now, while this is a great idea in concept due to avoiding the chance of full breakdowns of all production, this would take a lot of resources that now require the company to apply managing so many chains and making sure all are running smoothly. It also takes more ingenuity for when things break down and how to move the production around to where it will be needed most. Overall, the supply chain is not streamlined and is set up to where Apple would be spending more time and resources managing everything around the globe when they could save much more money just by producing. Nokia is a similar company to Apple, as they were the world's top cell phone maker and used to subcontract with other companies. In fact, about 32 Nokia patents are used in iPhones. In 2008, Nokia was outsourcing about 17% of the manufacturing volume of the company's mobile phone and their software. However, Nokia stopped using subcontractors in 2009. This change is expected to take off over $5 billion in revenues from electronic contract manufacturers. Nokia has a manufacturing plant in Oulu, Finland, and is working to automate almost every aspect of their operation. Automating manufacturing allows them to become much more efficient and puts them above others in the competition that are slower in manufacturing. The supply chain becomes more flexible and the company is able to adapt to new products much easier. Android is another company similar to Apple. Carriers and manufacturers are free to produce many different kinds of devices and have customized software. However, this also leads to many problems along the way. The first problem being that Androids come with bloatware, a software pre-installed by the manufacturer, which takes up space on the phone that some users do not have need for. Another problem Android users face is unreleased and delayed updates. Manufacturers build custom versions of Android for each phone sold, thus long waits for updates or not getting them at all. This also relates to Apple, as the older version of iPhones do not always get the newest updates because they are considered too old. The result of the analysis is that Apple has spread their operations and productions too far. There are too many companies producing Apple's parts and products, and this is leading to supply chain stress. Apple has been established as a world leader in technology and strive to prove it regularly. This has led to mismanagement and production complication among these businesses. It is much harder to manage production when it is external. Giving up responsibility means giving up control. Costs cannot be managed, production cannot be monitored, and workers' rights cannot be upheld. Unfortunately for Apple, their habit of releasing new models every year is a major factor in this. Since the product life cycle of most Apple products is usually no more than a few years, this means that production must be updated frequently. Changes like these being designated to so many outside sources can lead to major design flaws and extensive costs for Apple. An alternative action to being reliant on subcontractors is for Apple to build their own production companies and hire their own employees to manufacture their products. There would be no need for contracts with subcontractors to keep machines available for the sole use of Apple. If they had their own production company, they could use as many machines as they want when they want. This would shorten the supply chain, ultimately cutting down on the amount of shipping they do and on production costs through the outside resources. With subcontractors, there are always more risks involved. There could be issues involving the amount of productivity, reliance, and quality assurance. Apple needs suppliers and suppliers need Apple. But with big companies like Apple, they are giving their subcontractors a lot of access to their products and a lot of exposure to harmful chemicals. It makes it more difficult for Apple to keep the rules and regulations with so many suppliers and manufacturers. Apple became the world's first fair trade tech company in 2012, but in 2018, a Chinese supplier was exposed to toxic chemicals and poor working conditions. Apple has a code of conduct for suppliers, stating that Apple suppliers are required to provide safe working conditions, treat workers with dignity and respect, act fairly and ethically, and use environmentally responsible practices whenever they make products or perform services for Apple. But Pegatron, a big manufacturer for Apple located in China, still maintains poor working conditions and low wages. 109 of Apple's suppliers, which makes up 70% of them, violate at least one or more of Apple's rules on labor conditions, which could easily hurt their sales as well as employee morale. With their own manufacturing companies, Apple could easily reduce the amount of violations by being able to better enforce these rules and regulations. Another alternative action to relying on so many subcontractors is to reduce the amount of companies connected to the Apple supply chain. Apple has many companies connected to them in which they rely on. The top 10 companies all make different products. If Apple were to shorten this and find suppliers that make multiple products and suppliers that they can use for multiple resources, they could cut their buying and operating costs. They would also have more control over their product and their suppliers, while still outsourcing and still being able to concentrate on designing their products. Our preferred action plan would be to eliminate the number of companies tied to Apple. Doing this would hopefully lead to more control over operations and less room for extra cost in production and quality. By making most to all operations internal, Apple can maintain the hand-on control that it desires with increased operations. They could provide training and resources where properly needed instead of relying on smaller companies working separately. There are many ways for Apple to cut down on their supply chain. First, they can start fresh and build up their own productions. This would be costly, but ensure they can attend to every detail. Apple could also buy out the companies that supply for them currently. Simply acquiring the companies would allow them to maintain oversight among their productions and more closely. Another option that we found suitable would be limiting their outsourcing to a smaller set of companies in order to shrink their operations to the necessities. This is an option that does not require major changes from the company and is less disruptive to operations. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we really hope that you enjoyed it.